Hello, and welcome to another episode of Office Chat. Today's topic is COVID-19 and how it is affecting women in the workforce. Women make up 57.4% of the labor force in the US. When COVID-19 hit, unfortunately, 2 million women considered leaving the workforce. The reasons that were given: childcare, stress, lack of support from their employers. Here with me today to discuss this all too important topic is Dr. C. Ellen Washington, teaching fellow with the Oxford Roundtable and associate professor at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. Also joining me is Dr. L. Fears, a professor of multimedia journalism at Arkansas State University. She's also the coordinator of the multimedia journalism program at Arkansas State University in Jonesboro. Welcome, my guests.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So based upon the numbers that I've given you, what are your thoughts on how this pandemic, we know that it has affected many people worldwide. Currently, the numbers are, I think it's 7 million individuals have COVID-19. Of that, 250,000 have died. Now, to bring that closer to home, to the workforce, many people are working from home, not wanting to go into the office. That being said, most of the women who are out there, as I mentioned, are considering leaving the workforce in order to take care of their children or a loved one, a mom or dad. Whereas with the men, we don't see those numbers. Before the pandemic, I think somewhere I read that the number of men who were considering leaving the workforce just to leave it, the numbers were equal with the women. But now there's a greater number of women looking to leave the workforce. What are your thoughts on that? Either one of you.
Well, I think the numbers show themselves to be quite factual in many cases. I think that the sad part for me is that women, we gained so much traction in the workforce over the years, not only in being a part of the workforce, but also being in leadership roles in the workforce. And typically what happens when women decide to leave the workforce, and if they ever want to try to re-enter, it's a hard time for them to re-enter at the level in which they left. Oftentimes they're asked to start at the bottom and work their way back up. And we realize that when you're coming back in mid-40s, early 50s, and even older, that's an upward battle. And many women just don't want to go through that all over again. And so it's challenging for women to decide, do I want to continue to focus on my career, or do I put my family first? Unfortunately, it's not always a balancing act. And it's certainly hurting women of all colors in the workplace. Right,
just to give our listeners a bit of some of the numbers, between 2015 and 2020, 23.28% of the women were at the senior VP role level. Mm-hmm. Of that number, 17 to 21% were in the C-suite. Now we see that with COVID-19, there is a drop-off of many women who were looking at that trajectory to go to the top to fulfill their career, are having to put it on the back burner. What do you say, Dr. Fears?
Well, first of all, I agree with Dr. Washington. Everything she said is really, it's true. I would like to add that you got different groups of women. I believe the group that is impacted mostly is that age group of 35 to 44. That's the prime working age for women. And a lot of times that's the group that has dependent children in school. Mm-hmm. So the big thing here is childcare. These women want to continue with their careers, but my goodness, if they have children in the elementary grades, it's a different story. The older kids, we can expect them to be able to follow along in asynchronous or any type of instruction to some degree. I have some horror stories about that too, but when the smaller children, they need that instruction, they need that adult in the home or someone who can help them. And also what we're gonna see happen is, what we also know about when women are in these leadership roles that Dr. Washington just described, companies know that innovation increases as the proportion of female managers rises. This is research that we've seen. That's a study done by the Boston Consulting Group at the Technical University of Munich found that result. Professors at Utah State University reported that companies characterized by, quote, gender diverse leadership teams, unquote, are more effective than firms, quote, that at pursuing environmentally friendly strategies. Also, a study by S&P Global found that firms with female CEOs and CFOs produce superior stock price performance as compared with the market average. So not only are we losing this leadership, but there's a certain type of leadership and strengths that come with women who are in leadership positions. So that's what's going on. Yes.
Those are interesting numbers. So with that being said, why do you think companies aren't trying to support women during these times of crisis? Because we always hear stories, as you said, Dr. Fears, that with that age bracket, these are the women who mostly they're having children. And at that time, something hits, they have to either, I've got to leave the workforce to take care of my family. Why don't you think companies are supporting women more so? I read a report from like McKinsey, and they were saying that it's not there, that women don't feel that they're being supported. So they're having to leave after all that time of trying to get that gain. Because you look at the numbers that I mentioned between 2015 and 2020, I mean, there was a rise, numbers for women going up to the upper level was trending upwards. And then all at once, January, February, March of 2020, COVID-19 hits. And it's like an immediate effect on women. And then when you look at Black women, whom many of them are the head of the household, right, and they don't have anyone to take care of their children, they're having to scale back. So they were at one point the wage winners. Now they're probably looking at poverty because they don't have that support. And if women are productive, as you mentioned, Dr. Fears, in the workforce, and you see stock prices increasing, why don't you think that companies are like looking at, hey, we need to institute something? Granted, COVID-19 is fairly new, but aside from COVID-19, we see the same thing happening. Go ahead.
That's what I was going to say also. I think there are a couple of things going on, and I have not verified this, but this is a new phenomenon from what I can tell, and I've read what the experts have said to a certain degree. This caught everyone by surprise. So I predict, and I could be off here, that if companies continue to see their stock prices and everything else fall, they are going to be willing to listen and make exceptions or adjust some of the rules so that women can have a better chance at staying in those leadership roles. Now, you mentioned another group of women. There are the professional women, what we call white collar women. They also need help. A lot of them are dependent on the women that you mentioned, the single mothers who work in these service industries, in the daycare centers.
Right.
If they can't work and go to work, who is going to keep the children of women who can afford to pay those services if everything is closed? When schools close and daycares close, the women like me and Dr. Washington, well, I don't have dependent children. I don't know if she does, but who's going to keep our kids so that we can focus on our work? And I can tell you in higher education, we call that the motherhood penalty, when you have to make those choices and those sacrifices. You're expected to publish. You're expected to do everything that someone does who might have a supporting partner. But if your kids are at home, you have to be school teacher. You got to help them too. So once again, as the topic of the show mentions, this is why a lot of women are just saying, I've got to take a break. I've got to step back. I know it will cost me, but I have to do that.
And Dr. Washington, what do you say?
I very much agree. I think what's happening is people are going back to their core value systems. And that a lot of times helps in making difficult decisions. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I think with organizations, what they're going to have to really consider is take a look at their values themselves. And sometimes values have to change. And certainly with COVID-19, there's been a lot of change. And I don't know that organizations are going that deep into their restructuring process. and reframing how they're going to look at the workplace and how they're going to look at women in leadership roles and look at women in their workplace. Quite frankly, we need men to speak up for us as women. We can't be the only champion for this cause of women bowing out of the workforce. When you want change, change has to be a part of a collective effort, and women alone cannot move the needle. If we're going to have that happen, we're going to need men to step up, and we're going to need organizations to really take a closer look at their values and how they value women in the workplace.
Well, that's interesting that you would say that men speaking up, taking or stepping up and raising the hand, because as we've seen, there's definitely this structure or mindset that men can do it. And having a man to say, we need to rethink this so that we can make certain that the females stay here. I mean, I don't even know what that would look like, let alone sound like, unless it starts to affect the bottom line. And they say, hey, when this was in place, this is where the stocks were. I don't even know if there are studies with, men seeing this and calling it out, because for so long, men have always been at the top. And it has always been assumed that men would be there. Whereas now, I think the number is, I think I was looking, and according to the labor force, women make up half of the workforce. So if that half of the workforce were to just disintegrate and leave, what would happen? What would be the next steps? Women play an integral part of the workforce, although people don't want to accept that, but they do. And now, as I gave you the numbers, as far as making up the SVP level and the C-suite, I mean, even more so now, they're part of the labor force. And then to have that knowledge base and those thoughts and those ideas taken out abruptly, what would happen? And one of the things I noticed that was cited, one of the reasons that's really stood out, in addition to the child care, as you mentioned, but what about the women that don't have children, but the mental issue, mental capacity, those with the women who are taking care of a sick parent or a relative and unable to balance all of that. What are your thoughts on it? Or have you heard stories or heard other peers talk to you about that?
Yeah, I actually have. I tell you, one of the things, and that's a very good point, because right now you need two types of leaders, I think, and there are other styles, but I think right now you need strategic leaders and you need crisis leaders. One of the things when leaders are leading in crisis is they have to look at the human capital. They have to consider their emotional well-being. It's what we call in psychology Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If the basic needs aren't being met, you cannot expect people to think at a higher level or to perform at a higher level. And so that is why it's so important for strategic leaders and crisis leaders to really take a look and get a pulse of what's happening with their employees. And it's known that they say women, we're emotional beings, but men and women all have emotions. We both have emotions. But if you do not address the emotional strain, the stress, the anxiety, and the pressure, you're going to risk further damaging effects on the workforce and even the bottom line. Because when people fall apart emotionally and mentally, that takes a lot of time to build back up.
Dr. Fears, your thoughts?
Dr. Washington just reminded me of something. I know there have been some discussions here on where I work to recommend that we increase our, what do we call it, where you can go and get counseling, behavioral counseling. I think we have a plan where you can get 6 complimentary visits per calendar year. And we're even looking at raising that number, because what she just said is true. There are some stresses that people have not even dealt with. Well, I mean, we know about childcare issues, schools closing, kids falling behind in school, but the emotional toil on people. And I just know even when my dad was ill, before he passed away, how that affected me, having to be away to care for him. And I might want to lose weight, but I didn't want to lose that weight. And it just, it really, I would do it all over again if I had to, but it really took a toll on me all the way because I was there until he passed away.
Right.
And so the emotional, she can't say enough about that. And it's, and I have even adjusted the way I deal with students. If I see they can't take anymore, I listen. If they need a break, if they tell me they had a legitimate excuse for not meeting a deadline, I'll listen. And I mean, if they're pulling one on me, that's one thing, but I am more prone to listen now because I know this can be stressful. I had a family member that had a bout with depression, and it was really sad because this is a very young adult, and you just be surprised at how this disruption in society is affecting people in well beyond the workforce.
Right. Well, I'm looking at an article right now from the Brookings, and it said that COVID-19 is hard on women because the U.S. economy is hard on women, and the virus excels at taking existing tension and ratcheting them up. So you think about women, as I started out saying, who are, I don't want to say they're expected, but it seems as if though society expect women, when things hit the fan, we want women to come in and be the cure-all and take care of it, be the panacea, so to speak. Their jobs are the first jobs to go. And you don't see that necessarily with men. Men don't always have those concerns that women have because women are expected to take care of the children and make certain that there is a happy home. I read in another article from the McKinsey study that a lot of women who were looking at bonuses are having to scale back those bonuses that, I'm going to perform all that I can right now because at the end of the year or next year, I'll be considered for that promotion or that bonus. Some of them won't be able to get that for the simple fact that they're having to scale back. They're having to step outside of the workforce. And that in itself is a conversation that I definitely want to talk about, but just want to touch on it just slightly. What would your advice be to women, to friends, or people who find themselves in that situation where they were looking at, hey, this is going to be my year to make it to the next level, and then this hits? No fault of theirs. And the emotional drag on these women as a whole, you're hitting your career marks, the prime of your life, this takes place, and virtually they have to decide, I've got to take care of my kid because there's no child care. I've got to, do the schooling and whatnot. What would you say? Because there's a mental capacity involved in this also. Dr. Fears.
What would I say? I was sitting here thinking about what I would say to companies, but what I would say to the women.
To companies as well.
You need to make adjustments. Your employees are one of your best assets. And here's what, I've worked in diversity. Here's what you have to realize. Once you recruit the best talent and you give them professional development and they get to a certain point in their career, it's worth it to keep those employees and do what you can and make some adjustments. Because think about it, all of that knowledge they have, experience and wisdom of how to do the job, do you want that to just go by the wayside, or can you make an adjustment and come up with a way to still work with them so they can be a vital part of the workforce? Sure, you can rehire people if they decide to leave for an indefinite amount of time, but you got to start, and it is costly to start from the beginning, training people, getting them to learn the company. I know it is in higher ed, and I'm sure it's the same way in other industries as well. So it's always to your benefit to help retain. Retention is very important with employees that get to a certain level. So that's one thing I would say. But as for the women who are in this situation, that 18 to 35 to 44 age group, I would say take it easy on yourself. Don't be so hard on yourself if you are in that situation where you're not going to go to the next level just now. Do what you can to maintain your professionalism. For example, in higher ed, you can still write and work on your articles and your research while you're working at a limited capacity and having to take care of the kids, cook, and because everybody's at home all the time, and you don't have that breakaway to do your writing. So I would say, back to the mental health thing, lighten up just a little bit. I know we have standards that we set for ourselves and goals, but it's okay if you just miss it a little and you have to delay some things. Don't think that everything is over, because we already know we're going to work longer these days. So I know it doesn't feel good, because sometimes you can do all of that and there's no pandemic and you still might not go to the next level. So I would just say, don't be too hard, but that's just what comes to mind.
Okay. And Dr. Washington?
Certainly, I echo many of those comments. I think one of the things I would tell women is to be resilient, to practice patience and some self-care, and even consider reprioritizing some things. One of the things that I've always stressed to young professionals is you have to take some responsibility for your own career trajectory. And now is the time of opportunity. Even despite some of the massive layoffs, the furloughs, companies closing, opportunities abound when there's crises, when there's something new and different.
Right.
So be creative, consider where there are gaps, identify what your strengths are and where you can fill a gap and meet a need. You have skill set, you have knowledge, you have ability, and rely on those strengths to carry you forward in a difficult time, because it won't be this way always.
Right.
So keep a positive attitude and look to the future with a positive outlook, and surround yourself around those who will support you and who will uplift you and who can also help you in thinking creatively about how you go forward with your career.
Well, thank you both, Dr. Fears and Dr. Washington. Again, this has been Rob Harper with Office Chat. Tune in again when we will take part 2 of our discussion, how COVID-19 is affecting women in the workforce, mainly African American women. Thank you both. Reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions or something that you would like to be discussed. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.